Hi everyone, thanks for watching. If you enjoy our shows, please like our videos and subscribe to our channel. And you can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv.
Hello and welcome to this edition of Age of Truth TV. I'm Lucas Alexander in Copenhagen, Denmark. It's the 4th of July 2019, Independence Day, and our guest is a world traveler, a truth researcher of ancient history and civilizations, global conspiracies, and alien interaction with planet Earth. He's an author, lecturer, and founder of CCC Book Publishing Company. Brad Olsen. Good evening from Copenhagen and good morning to you, Brad Olsen from Santa Cruz in California. Welcome to the show and thank you very much for joining us here on Independence Day.
Hey, Lucas. Thank you for having me on. I've been following your interviews on the Age of Truth and I'm really happy to be here and speak with you today.
I'm looking forward to our conversation. You have said there are predatory forces, interdimensional species, operating from another dimension who prey on us, feeding on human beings' emotions such as fear, anguish, anger, hatred, and anxiety, keeping us in a constant us versus them low vibrational state of confusion, dividing the human race. The Archon network, also known as the Jinn, demons, or the deity demiurge. If true, if yes, how could this be possible?
Wow, getting into it right away, Lucas. I like it. Yeah, in my book, Modern Esoteric Beyond Our Senses, I get into the Archon network, this invisible force, really a multidimensional entity force of malevolent, you could say ET, but they're kind of beyond ET because they don't always take a physical form. They can. Some of them, like reptilians or greys, could also be considered in the Archon network. But the ones that really affect us are the ones that can basically attach themselves to our electric body, so to speak, the spiritual side of our humanness, and be this force that can do things to our body and ourselves and our minds that we don't know why we act or feel or behave in the way we do sometimes, because there is this invisible Archon network force that is attaching to us. And it's very important for people to understand this, because for perhaps their whole lives, they can go through with ailments or problems in their life and not even know that this has been a big issue in their lives. So I'm really glad you brought that up, because it's a very difficult concept for a lot of people to understand, but it's really what is keeping the human race and a lot of individuals in a perpetual state of fear and anger and the lower emotions in which they feed off of. In fact, there's even a word for it called louche, that the more fearful and afraid you are, the more this emanates from you, and it feeds right into their whole existence. And they like it when people are in this state. In fact, the whole planet, basically, of humans is emanating these lower emotions, this fear-based emotions. And it's one of the problems we have. Now, if we were to turn that around, if we were to confront this Archon network and perhaps work on removing them from each of us and also bringing ourselves up to a higher state of happiness and bliss every single day, they would starve out and they wouldn't be able to affect us so much. So it's really the biggest problem I feel facing the human race right now.
What is the origin of these Archons? Where did they come from?
In my research, they've been here about 7,700 years. And this was a time when humans were obviously not nearly as populated on this planet as we are now, but also at a very vulnerable stage. It was kind of between the two nations of our antediluvian civilizations. It was around the time civilizations were blooming in Egypt and Sumeria, but for the rest of us, we're very vulnerable. And at that time, this is also when it's believed that the reptilians came here in force and started to establish themselves.
But not before the Egyptian civilization?
My understanding is during the time of the Atlanteans, pre-Egyptian, it was relatively Archon free. And that's why the civilizations of Lemuria and Atlantis were so highly advanced, much more so than you could say we are even today.
But who created them? Where did they come from? I guess they didn't just suddenly appear.
No, they didn't suddenly appear. They are basically almost like a swarm of locusts on a farmer's field. They'll just go planet to planet, find a vulnerable point, come in and attach themselves.
Really?
Yeah, when they get here, they're very, very difficult to remove, especially in a stage where, as we can see in our own world history for the last thousands of years, it's almost a perpetual state of warfare or conflicts going on somewhere in the planet. So it is feeding into this whole loosh that they can survive and thrive even.
Well, if there is a source, force, God, entity, creator, then why is there all the negative stuff? And why create these parasite entities like demons, archons, jinns, and even the malevolent alien races such as reptilians and others that we hear exists? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, we have to understand that we operate on free will. That is, each one of us can make decisions in our own lives. We're influenced in many different varied ways. And by those decisions we make, we can either allow these things into our lives. Like I said, if you have fear or anger, that's one way that they'll just come right to you and stay with you. Or we can try to take a higher path, a higher road, and clean ourselves up, clean up our thoughts even, and banish these things out. But when you do that, we're vulnerable then for attack. It's almost like when you start to become awakened, a beacon goes off. And here's a person who's awakened. Here's a nail that's sticking out, bat it back down. And so it is also one thing positive about waking up. You start to become more aware, but then a negative side is you become a target in a way too. And for myself and a lot of people I know who are working on this, they have challenges. And the underlying theme is there are these archons that can attach themselves. And I've just gone through some energy healing in the last few days, along with a cleanse. And one of the things that was revealed to me is that there were some attachments. And this person who works in this level said he was able to extract them. And I'll tell you, Lucas, it feels like a burden has been lifted. So unless you really understand the issue and then seek out some kind of remediation, they're going to stick with you probably your whole life. And then you go on to the whole concept of clearing your family and friends and immediate surroundings. And then the big picture is, how do we clear the whole planet? And that will be a challenge for the human race.
But still, if there is a God or a God mind, a source, a higher power creating everything behind the whole universe and beyond, how is it possible for archons and something that negative, feeding on human beings' energies and emotions, to manifest?
Well, I see what you mean. It's almost like a mosquito. A mosquito can carry malaria or other parasites. They're very annoying. They get in our space. We swat at them. But does that make a mosquito inherently bad or evil or shouldn't be here? No, it just is, because that's what it is. So I think even on the Archon level, yes, we perceive them as bad and evil and damaging to us, but to them, they're like a mosquito. They're just trying to survive, and this is the way they do it. So as far as the God mind goes, I think it's kind of, it is the duality of the world we live in. In a way, if we didn't have the pressure of being as advanced as we would like to be, if we didn't have that duality in the world, it wouldn't be as challenging for us to go through what we have to go through on this planet. And let's face it, this is like Earth school here. We're pretty much locked on this planet until we get it right. That is on an individual basis and perhaps a more collective basis, before we can ascend to the level of benevolent entities which are out there and watching us and monitoring us. But again, we have this thing called free will. So it's really up to us to make the decisions in our lives, despite all the noise and all the traffic and fake news and everything else that's out there to distract us. We have to be focused on the goal, and that is ascension. And it's right up there in Maslow's hierarchy of needs, that we do get to the self-actualization point at the top of the pyramid. And that's what each of us are striving for. And I think another word for that is what the Buddha was seeking, and that is enlightenment. But there are many pitfalls on the way. And if you know the story of the Buddha, he was certainly challenged at many points getting to where he had to get to, but eventually made it. And so it's the hero's journey as well, the way that we can each try to become the best human we can possibly be.
So it is actually part of the plan, or the game in a way, the higher plan, that we have to have this duality, that we have to have good and evil, have to have evil in order to have the good, or what? And therefore archons and demons.
Well, I think that's correct, that we are in this very strictly dualistic world. And if it were not so, if everything was just perfectly fine every single day, we wouldn't have the opportunity to grow as a spiritual being. They joke about it in some Buddhist texts as the land of the lotus eaters, that we would all just be eating the lotus plants, kind of high on life all the time and not really doing anything or not really being challenged. But in this way, we're directly challenged. It's so in your face on planet Earth. It's quite different from other benevolent societies, say the Pleiadians or Sumerians or all the other benevolent entity planets, where they have cleared this out. They have gotten it right. And now they're all basically working on becoming ascended masters.
So archons cannot enter that dimension?
Not at that point. Nope, they're out. They're booted.
How do we know that, or how do you know that?
My understanding through working with UFO researchers, including the work of Billy Meyer, who was contacted with Pleiadians, and some of the entities that he has suggested came and visited him in Switzerland. He's still alive today.
A lot of people find Billy Meyer's work very controversial. They said about him that his story wasn't true. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm friends with Michael Horn. He's a fellow researcher here in America. I've been to many conferences and speaking with him. I think it's hard to refute some of his testimony. Not only that, but the photographs he's been taking of the beam ships coming to visit him, some of the evidence surrounding it. And let's just use that as a single example of many of these benevolent ET groups that are here to observe. They do not want to get too directly involved, although people like Billy Meyer and other contactees will have the opportunity to meet them. But it is, once again, through their free will that they choose to do so.
Why don't they interact or interfere and help the human race, which is in a very bad state at the moment? We could have a better world if there were these forces who could actually help out.
Well, they could help out, but I don't think they're allowed to. It's along the lines of the Prime Directive that we learned about in the Star Trek series. There's a lot of backstory to how Gene Roddenberry got that information for the first Star Trek series, that he was sitting in on seances with the Council of Nine, which were talking with benevolent ET groups. And one of the primary parts of that show was that there is this Prime Directive that you can go to these places, you can observe, but you cannot get directly involved. And this ties into the whole law of karma. If you do get involved, then you get intertwined in the drama of the people that you get involved with. And a lot of these ET groups, the benevolent ones, don't want to do that. So then you could say conversely, well, what about the malevolent ETs? How do they get away with it? Because obviously they're not working in Prime Directive. They're doing the abductions. They're doing cattle mutilations. They're very much involved with this planet. Well, they're from here. Have you heard of the term interdimensionals? That is, entities that are right here on this planet, that live underground bases, that come up to sometimes intercede with us in this world. Well, they think they're part of this Earth family too, albeit somewhat secretive and far fewer numbers than we are. But to get back to the Archon network, they're part of that as well. And this is their control grid, and this is how they've kept humanity asleep and enslaved for all these centuries. So
in a nutshell, you're saying that the benevolent races are not allowed to interfere, but the malevolent ones are actually, they are well, not allowed, but they're certainly capable of doing it because of an inner Earth civilization, you say?
Correct. They have been on this planet for many centuries, this 7,700 year mark, including bases that we know of. Right here in North America, Dulce is actually a very ancient base. Other ET bases, Mount Shasta, Aleutian Islands off of Alaska, bases in the Solomon Islands have malevolent ETs. Another base in the Adriatic Sea off of Italy is an underwater leading to underground base. They have been here a long time. They've been monitoring us. The malevolent ET groups are the ones who have been actively working through humans, let's call them cutouts, those higher elite people. Let's put it this way, the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds are more like the captains and the colonels.
What people refer to as the Illuminati.
Correct. These control groups who work in secret, that work with these entities, and therefore they're allowing them in. So that is their way around the Prime Directive. And they have been here for quite a long time, working with everyone from the Caesars, even all the way back to the pharaohs of Egypt have ET connections, and you can even see and read some of the Egyptian hieroglyphics stating such.
I'd like to get into that at a later point as well.
Sure.
The malevolent races are from here on Earth, not from other planetary systems.
Well, they can come from other planetary systems too, but the ones that are here have been here and were actually born here at some of these underground bases, some of these reptilian forces. And I know at Dulce, New Mexico, right on the Colorado-New Mexico border, pretty close to the Four Corners area, is this massive underground base. And it has been there for a long time.
So they're not from the Draco star system?
Well, they were originally, but again, think in terms of a swarm of locusts. They came here, they found a field that was good for them to eat and survive in, and they stayed. And they stayed, and they had progeny who have then become the entities that are here today. And they feel like they have provenance with this planet. The other thing I should bring up to you is that they also feel like they helped seed this planet of life. that they go back, way back to all the way to the age of the dinosaurs, say, we brought this here. We terraformed this planet. We brought this life here. Therefore, we have a right to stay. So if you think about it in those terms, they can get around the prime directive. Now, you see, the problem with the reptilians, though, they don't want to evolve. They're pretty much third and fourth dimensional entities. To go to the fifth dimension, you have to be a being of love. And they have rejected that. And many times, benevolent nations, ET groups, have attempted to tell them, look, you got to stop doing what you're doing to Earth and other planets because you're not going to evolve. There are good and bad reptilians. There are some who do want to break free of that and who do want to evolve to fifth dimensional love-based entities.
But they're so-called cold-blooded, right? And their DNA doesn't change, according to a lot of researchers into this field. So isn't that why they don't really change over time?
That's correct. They're very ancient species. They have not changed in millions and millions of years. They don't want to change. Some may wish to, but collectively as a whole, at least the ones that are here on this planet and perhaps where they're getting their marching orders from, Alpha Draconis, this is just a colony. This is a planet that they have a vested interest in keeping in their sphere of influence, and they don't want to leave. But for us to evolve, for us to become an advanced race of humans, they have to leave because they've held us down for so long and quite frankly can't be trusted.
So these Archons, demons, they are working through the reptilians, or are they two separate entities, would you say?
Well, they're two separate entities, but they're working on the same energetic level as basically parasitic entities that have infected our entire planet.
So without the Archon possession into a reptilian, the reptilian could be or would be good?
Well, they have the choice to make. Again, it's their free will if they want to collectively ascend. But they don't want to do that. They would much rather be the generals controlling this planet and others. We're not the only planet that has infections of the Archon network. But this is basically one of the steps you have to go through to get to become an enlightened race, to bring Earth together as a family, to create real peace on Earth. The first thing you have to do is address the Archon infection and get rid of it.
So how do we humans, those you claim could be infected, how do we, well, dismiss or defeat these Archon energies?
Well, we do it on an individual basis. First of all, think about the body electric, that we are really two forms in one. We are this physical body that can pound our fist and have feelings, but we are also this spiritual force that is basically an electrical being. I love the bumper sticker, Lucas, that says, we're not humans having a spiritual experience, we're spirits having the human experience. And if you think of it in that term, and never forget that this entity of your spirit is always with you and is always out there interceding on your behalf. This is what we call our spirit guide, or perhaps our angels. There is a higher side to you that if you can tap into this and be aware of it, you then start to become much more in control of your situation. And I would also add to that, on an individual basis, you have to try to be as happy and laugh a lot and do things that make you feel good. The French call it the joie de vivre, the joy of life. You should embrace that every single day. And if you do, the Archons have a very difficult time penetrating into your essence. And then, like I was mentioning, doing some energy work with someone who really understands what these Archons are. And I'm not sure if I've gotten rid of mine. I've been told they were taken off, and I felt like a big burden. And it's interesting you bring this up, because this just happened a few days ago, that something has just lifted on me, and I feel much lighter and healthier. And they do seem to have this kind of web work attachment to us on this body electric of ours and can affect us in that way.
Synchronicity, huh?
It is. Well, like the questions.
How can anyone know or suspect that they may be influenced by these archons or have these any archon energies attached to them in order to get rid of this dark energy? I mean, a lot of people would become a little bit paranoid thinking that, oh, there's a bad emotion, I feel bad, you know, something negative is happening, this person said this, something is going bad at the you know, during the day or at the job, you know. Could people become a little bit paranoid hearing this, thinking, oh, maybe I have these demonic entities attached to me?
Well, I would start by assuming that you do. Unless you do some kind of energy work or are very attuned to your chakras and this body electric, that you're going to have them, because everybody has them. But what you could do to mitigate the damage is just to try to be happy and let go of the fear and the negative emotions as best you can, so as you're not feeding them.
If people are looking at other people and they're very affected by their energy, maybe that could affect relationships and people around them. And as I just said, people becoming a little bit paranoid if it's about demonic entities such as archons and not just, you know, feeling good or bad. Absolutely.
And when we look around, and we were just talking in the setup, traveled to Denmark, and while I find Denmark to be one of the happiest countries in the world I've ever been to, and studies have shown you guys are, and congratulations for that, I'm sure you still have homeless people and people that are just kind of crazy. And there is an infection on this planet that a lot of people cannot overcome. And really, you can judge a race of people by their lowest common denominator. And as long as we have starvation on this planet, mental insanity, and all the other things that go with people just losing their control, then you can tell that we are still infected by this this archonic entity as a whole.
So is it actually these archons or jinns who created the so-called heavenly dimension, an illusionary realm maybe of light and bliss, in order to trap the human being's souls at the point of death, when the soul leaves the body and go into the so-called life review and tunnel of light, going into this heavenly realm, a hijack of the soul, a soul harvesting karma wheel, reincarnation soul trap, in order for these archons to put the human souls back on the planet in another body and a wiped memory. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. In my second book in the esoteric series called Future Esoteric, The Unseen Realms, I talk about the screen trap that basically envelops this planet, that when a soul dies, they are attracted to the light. Just like when you're out in your yard in the summer and you got a light on and all the bugs start attracting to the light, it's the same way that we just think that this is where we need to go, but actually it is a trap to keep us here on this planet. That this is a place where it's very, very difficult to leave as a spirit. Some of us have come here on a mission to help this planet wake up, knowing that we might not be able to get out. If we fall into all the bad habits that a lot of earthlings do.
Such as?
Well, just, you could say drugs, alcohol, just numbing the pain kind of thing, not working on yourself on a spiritual basis, on an advanced enlightenment course.
So does that mean that people shouldn't have a glass of wine in the evening with dinner?
No, there are health benefits to having 1 or 2 glasses of wine. And I'm not going to be a hypocrite and say that I don't do that. But, you know, that maybe that's part of the joie de vivre a little bit. But getting over the top with it, becoming an alcoholic, becoming a drug addict, you're trapped at that point. You will have to be reborn again. because you didn't get your lessons. Look, we're all here in our school to learn individual lessons. And until we grasp them in their entirety, and really it's like peeling the layers off an onion. You'll get to one level, but then that'll just lead you to the next things you have to do.
So isn't that still a religious kind of way of looking at things? You know, judgmental, being very, you know, that you're not right, that you will have to go back and you will be corrected if you like didn't get it right this time around, and if you're into bad habits.
It's only judgmental against yourself. You mentioned the life review, and that is something that happens. It's not St. Peter who's going to judge you before you get into heaven. It's really no religion involved. It is you seeing what you've put out into the world. And my understanding, when you have that life review, you look at everything you've done to people and animals and this planet. And if you've done things that have helped, that's a good thing. If you've done things that have hurt, you're going to have to go back and experience the same hurt that you've done.
And even if you kill a fly?
Well, the way I look at it with a mosquito who may be carrying a parasite that could hurt me, if they get into my space, then I have the right to shoo them away. I even try not to kill mosquitoes, but inevitably you have to sometime. There are cultures in the Far East, the Jainism, they won't even kill a mosquito if it lands on them. They will walk very delicately not to step on an ant. I mean, they believe the karma is so strong that everything you do affects you in your life. And incidentally, this is what Billy Myers said about the Pleiadians, is that they are so careful not to affect anything in the surrounding area that they will have to go back and repair it if they do.
But there are even bacteria or species that we can't even see. I mean, when we walk down the street, we will eventually step on something and kill very small, almost invisible animal-type life forms.
That's correct. But I think it goes into your mindset doing it. If you are making a very concerted effort every single day to tread very lightly and give back as much as you can, that will factor into your life review. But more importantly, I think it's how we affect the people around us. That is really what the life review is. How have you treated your fellow humans? I, for example, give change, dollar to homeless people all the time. I feel if they're asking, I'm giving. And it's not a big deal to me, but it is a big deal to them because some of them may not even have enough to buy a meal. Now, maybe they're going to go out and buy some booze or drugs and just tap into that addiction once again.
But if you go down Skid Row in Los Angeles, you'll be a very poor man. I'm not just talking about you getting robbed, but I mean, if you have to give change to everybody who is homeless, which is a terrible situation, of course, that we have so many homeless people all over the world. But I mean, if you're saying that you give to everybody, I mean, that would almost be impossible, wouldn't it?
Well, it's not like going around being the Pied Piper and giving something to everyone. In my case, if I see someone, one or two or five, however long I have a few dollar bills or change, they'll be the lucky ones. Yeah, you're right. Can you affect everybody? Are you going to go directly to the place where they all live and hand out silver coins? No, that's not really practical. I'm not a rich man. I wish I was. And if I was, I would certainly strive to bring up the human race. And that is what we're all here to do. We may not realize it, but think about it. If you truly understand the laws of karma, the cause and effect of everything you do in your life and how it affects other people and the life review, you're going to be the best person you can possibly be. And if everybody did that, Lucas, we could be on the road to some kind of enlightenment of a race. And that is why the ETs are so interested in seeing what us Earthlings are going to do down here. Because to them, with all the war and starvation and things that we're doing to ourselves, we're like the Planet of the Apes to them. We're some kind of lower civilization that they're just so puzzled how we can even get by in our lives. And and viruses and Archons and all these things that affect us in the world. By the way, viruses are not from here. They were introduced to keep us down. These higher benevolent societies do not have them anymore. They live hundreds and hundreds of years, even though they're very similar to us physiologically. They have done away with all the harmful diseases and other afflictions, all the pathogens that affect humans. They've gotten rid of them.
You're talking about races on other planets who have different civilizations, more advanced.
But this is the promise of planet Earth. Now, just last month, I was speaking at Contact in the Desert, and one day we went out to Giant Rock and the Integratron. That is a fascinating building, and if you came to California, I'd love to give you a little tour of some of the more esoteric locations here. The Integratron was directly influenced by a man named George Van Tassel, who owned the land there. And it was a machine, a building that would have put negative ions into a person. Now, I live right out here on the coast of California, and I love to go out to the beach, and the crashing waves create these negative ions, and it makes you feel really good. Well, this is what some ETs were telling George Van Tassel, that you can create a building to do this. And when you do that, this is how they can live to be hundreds of years old. Just like us, just human bodies like us. They even look quite similar to us.
So these are beings on this earth, living here amongst us, or what?
Or visiting us, or observing us, but coming down. And there are certain people, Billy Meyer, George Van Tassel, people who have interceded with them that they're not afraid of, that they feel they can trust, and that they can work through. And in the case of George Van Tassel, he was just about to bring the Integratron online when he was just, he got attacked by many different entities, including the Men in Black, and the government came down on him, and the Integratron never went online.
These entities you're talking about, are they the so-called Nordics?
They are. The tall whites, tall Nordics. By the way, they have a base. The tall whites are in Area 54, part of the Nellis Range. We often think of Area 51 as the testing ground on the other side of Nellis. Every time I'm down in Las Vegas for a conference, I have a bunch of friends, and we like to go camping. And we were just down there. Charles Hall talked about the tall whites off of Indian Wells, southern part of the Nellis Range. And boy, did we see a lot of activity, not extraterrestrial, but a lot of military activity in the day and the night and the morning, including being buzzed by helicopters and planes flying around. It was amazing.
Well, at Indian Wells, you also see very interesting, let's just say, military planes or military activity going on and off from there, certainly.
Yes, it's a very busy base. And we've camped out at Rachel, Nevada, watching over at the Area 51 area.
Well, you can't really get close to the Area 51 place,
Not
can
anymore.
you? You can only go to this alien center, this tourist place, right?
Little alien. Yeah, it's a little restaurant there, but we got some rooms, and we camped out, and we built a fire and stayed up late into the night. I was the first to go down around 2 a.m., but some of my friends stayed up till about 4, and they did see some activity over in the area where the Area 51 area is.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people go out there and do it all the time.
Right. So you were talking about being happy and focusing on joy and laughter and all of that. But at the same time, you also just said you have to watch your step. You have to think about what you do. You have to be concerned all the time in a way in order to not be judged when you go to this life review. So that's a little bit contradictory, isn't it? I mean, to be slightly paranoid but still be happy. How can you be happy if you have to watch your every move?
Well, you're happy by watching your every move. You're happy because you're knowing that you're not affecting the world in a negative way. You're going out there with a good mood, with, hey, if little old lady needs my help crossing the street, I'll do that for her. I look for any opportunity. If somebody asks me for help, I always offer it. So you just go out in the world being open.
But you still have to protect your energies to, let's just say, other people's bad energies, right? Using your intuition in certain situations a lot. So you cannot just be all sweetness and light all the time.
Right. There are definitely energy vampire type people out there that will perhaps detect that, hey, here's someone in a good mood. Maybe I can fleece him for something more than $1 that he's going to give me.
Or that could happen in your workspace or even your family, or you could become, you know, you can get into a relationship, a love relationship with somebody, you know, a little bit like that.
Absolutely. But we go into it knowingly. And if you have the power of knowing that there are perhaps pitfalls in the road before you take a journey, well, at least you're prepared for them when they come. Let's put it that way. But for me, it would not change my demeanor.
So if we don't want to go into this tunnel of light and see the life review, if we want to escape this reincarnation soul trap, and we don't want to do that whole treadmill again, where can we go and how can we just say, no, I am not gonna do that again?
Right, and a good idea would be to resist the light, as my understanding is. It is a soul trap.
So if you resist the light, what do you do? Go towards the darkness? What actually is the tool, or what can you do? What do you see there, do you think?
Well, be informed. You can read the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Tibetan Book of the Dead. You can start to visualize what it would be like to be a spirit again. And I have a whole laundry list of things that I want to do on this planet before I leave. And that includes, as a spirit, traveling around the planet and seeing some of the mysteries that are still unresolved. To go under the Great Pyramids on the Giza Plateau and see the network of chambers and passageways and perhaps the Hall of Records and perhaps even a ET base down there that we know very little about.
So how do we resist the light? Are we magnetically drawn to it so there's no escape? Or can we just say, no, I'm not going to go in this direction?
I think we can just say no. You will have spirit guides that will join you.
Good ones or bad ones or deceivers?
Well, that's a good question. I think if you see some relatives and you feel it on a soul basis, here's my long lost grandfather, he's waiting for me, he's there, I can tell that it's him.
How can you tell? What if it is these Archons in disguise, holographically projecting themselves especially as one of the loved ones that you have missed for so many years, who passed on years ago, and then of course you'll see them and then you'll be trapped because you are drawn to the ones you love?
Well, that's a great question. And you got me there. I don't know the answer to that. Maybe there are these traps out there. Maybe there are false entities that you might recognize and fall for it. So therefore, I think the best solution is just be the very best human being you can be every single day until that moment.
So until then, we have to do more research on whether or not to go to this light that everybody talks about.
We have to do so much more research on everything. But I think in the living years, we should definitely focus on ourselves and to learn how to become the best human being we can. And also strive to be enlightened, strive to be all-knowing if you can. There's the opportunity to do that. And this is why Buddhism is a philosophy, not a religion. It is a religion because it's been changed, but the true tenets of what the Buddha had said, and even many things of what Jesus said. I have this great book, Lucas, called The Parallel Teachings of Buddha and Jesus, and it is remarkable how similar they were.
Do you believe that these religious historical figures were actually historical, or were they fiction written by people in the past in order to create these religions and these very fascinating people that people follow even to this day?
I think in the case of Jesus and Buddha, they were both real people. They have walked this earth. They were ascended masters in human body. And there are those who are here today. There are people who are very advanced and perhaps are karma free and are just here to help out in some ways, and then they can leave.
So what is the best evidence we have to support that Jesus was actually living on this earth at that time, since a lot of people claim that the Bible was written years after that, or at least after when he supposedly lived?
Yeah, there is, of course, the Bible as a reference. There is not very much historical reference of him living in that age. Little tidbits here and there, but really he was a very minor figure in the history of the day, like in the Roman historical records. He was just a blip on the screen, basically. I mean, somebody only lived to 33 years old, but he influenced the people around him, and that is how his legacy lived on.
So it is still a matter of belief then? Well,
yes and no. Here's an example I give in Future Esoteric, and it is talking about some very high technology that has been given to us through ETs. And one of them is called the yellow cube. Have you ever heard of that? It is an holographic image generator that was transferred over to the US in exchange for the secrecy. Now, it was given to us by the Greys, and you could say right there, well, maybe there's something about it. But as it was demonstrated in 1964 in front of the generals, they said, we can use this to look at any historical event. Because many of the generals were very devout Christians, they said, well, we want to see the crucifixion of Christ. And they queued it up and they played it. And apparently there's even a film of it at that time that has not resurfaced. But the yellow cube is still in our possession.
How do we know that it is actually a real thing, this yellow cube?
Because it's held in Los Alamos and other people have used it and worked with it.
So government officials or military people, whistleblowers, have said that they have actually seen this yellow cube?
Correct. And have worked on it. And it works with our mind. I mean, this is technology that has yet to be really understood or explored or developed.
Like Project Looking Glass?
Correct. It is definitely in that category. It is in Project Looking Glass. It is Stargate technology. It can access the past. Everything that has happened in the past, this is also in the Akashic records.
But could you actually go back and change the past?
Well, not necessarily. There are pitfalls if you try to do that. And we could talk about time travel as well.
Alter timelines.
But again, if you do that, you're affecting things. And if you affect things, it's the whole grandfather paradox. If you go back in time and kill your own grandfather, well, then you would cease to exist in the future, right? But if you do that, you're stuck in your grandfather's timeline. You cannot go back. So if you do time travel, and I know Andrew Basiago and other people who have been involved in Project Pegasus, some time travel experiments that were done here in this country using the same looking glass technology, but also to project people back in time. And you have to be very, very careful. Once again, it's like the Palladians visiting Billy Meyer. They tread very lightly, because if you do anything that will change the course of history as it's happened, there are ramifications for you personally.
But wasn't that what they tried to do with CERN? The Hadron Collider underneath Switzerland, trying to alter the timelines, or maybe open, as they claim, open a portal to letting demonic entities, perhaps Archons, enter this dimension.
That's correct. And it's a very dangerous game they're playing. And it could affect things on an energetic, spiritual level in such a way that they don't know what they're getting into. So that could be a very dangerous proposition. And I understand every time they get to the point where something is supposed to happen at CERN, something breaks down. Like Fortunately, there are some benevolent entities or whatever that don't let it happen. Because if it did happen, it would certainly affect all of us, perhaps in a negative way. If we were to open up portals and entities could come streaming in, then we'd really have a problem on our hands. Not that we don't already, but we got to reverse that and not let them in and work on ourselves.
Why do you think that on the ground outside of CERN there is, well, symbolically a dancing Shiva figure out there, which is of course the Hindu religion, and this is science. This is a military base.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. And people have filmed secret filming of people doing rituals at that Shiva statue. And just like Oppenheimer, the father of the atomic bomb, said, "I am Shiva, the destroyer and creator of worlds." That's how he felt when he was unleashing this incredible technology. And isn't it interesting that the very first UFO sightings started around the time of the atomic bomb testing? And Roswell, New Mexico is not very far away from White Sands, New Mexico, where these atomic tests have occurred. So there is an incredible amount of attention of the ET world on what humans are going to do with this new technology. And quite frankly, it's like a little kid with fireworks on the 4th of July, lighting them off and not really paying attention to what happens and maybe blowing one off in their hand and losing a finger. I mean, we are playing with some dangerous toys right now, and we have to be very careful that we don't do it wrong.
How many extraterrestrial or interdimensional races or types do you actually know of or have heard about?
The data point I keep hearing is there's 20, over 20, 22 that are directly interceding in Earth. There are far more that are just watching, that are just observing us from the sidelines.
When you say far more,
what
does that mean?
Hundreds.
Only hundreds of different species exist, do you think?
Correct. And they may be observing us not even on a physical level, just like on an avatar, or watching us through remote viewing, you could say. Watching us multidimensionally. You know, we always think, well, why don't they just land on the White House lawn? Well, they can't. They don't want to. Because if they did do that, then they would be our saviors. Look, we're very superstitious people here on Earth. We would probably say, hey, they're God. They're here to save us. And then they have the burden of then being our savior, being our gods. They don't want to do that. They want us to do it ourselves. It's our job to do it. It's our dirty mess we've gotten ourselves into, and it's up to us to get ourselves out.
You talk about 20 plus races that you know of or interacting with, let's just say, government officials, or on Earth itself?
On Earth itself, some interceding with higher up levels, and others, like the Aldebaran system, which were working with the Vril Society, with Germans post-World War I, giving them advanced technology in the form of telepathic blueprints. Maria Orsic and the Vril Society, Thule Society, which all the Third Reich leaders were part of. I mean, there's a very occult part of the Third Reich that we didn't learn about in school, that has been edited out, which then became the Anunnaki Society. Nazi Germany was the only modern government to acknowledge and support the study of occult studies. That's very important to understand, because they became very advanced very quickly. And had they had another 6 months or a year, could have unleashed some of these wonder weapons that we still don't have explanation for in technology as we are understood today.
A lot of people speculate that the Nazis were actually directly involved with these malevolent ET races. Did they become involved with them, and why?
Well, it started with benevolent ET races. Germany is a very technologically minded society, very advanced when it comes to machining and creating products. That's why we still get BMWs and Mercedes-Benz cars are considered some of the highest quality vehicles you could buy.
But that's consumerism, isn't it? And slave mentality, really.
Well, it is. But my point would be that because Germans have always been this way, at least in the last 100 or so years, they were believed right after World War I that they could become a benevolent, helpful society. And that's why the real psychic mediums were allowed to get this information. They were usurped by the Thule Society, who then was working also with the malevolent ETs. And Germany got a crash disk in the Black Forest. Mussolini had a crash disk that was in a very good shape that he allowed to be taken back and studied by the Germans. And by the way, when the forces came in on Germany, none of these craft were recovered. None of the scientists who worked on them were either alive or found. And a lot of this stuff got shepherded away.
How do we know that Mussolini and also Hitler actually knew about these crashes and that this actually happened?
Oh, there are records for it. There are even diagrams. There is even some footage of them flying some of these crafts.
Footage of
Correct.
Mussolini in a UFO?
Well, not Mussolini's UFO. Those are more like records that were recovered. But there are videos of the Haunebu craft of Nazi Germany that were flying, even over the great tank battle of Kursk outside of Moscow in 1943. Many sightings of a craft that was not there fighting, but just there in an observatory state.
But couldn't this just be a military craft, more advanced than we actually are being told?
Yeah, absolutely they are. And it all goes back to this earliest backward engineering of these flying craft. Now, look, just the craft that was sighted in Germany in the 1940s, well, that is still beyond what we are told technology can achieve today. And this is over 70 years ago. So even the Roswell crash, which 2 days ago was the anniversary of that, that's over 70 years ago, 72 years ago. Happy UFO Day, Lucas. July 2nd is UFO Day because that was the anniversary of the Roswell crash. These are still technologies that we have not gasped or given the opportunity to understand on the overt level. Now, you mentioned it yourself, hundreds of years advanced. Yes, they are. The secret space program, working on these technologies, backward engineering, brings the human race to a very interesting point in our evolution. Think about this, Lucas. Right now, we still have people who live in the Stone Age, in the Amazon basin, in some of the remote valleys of Papua New Guinea. People are still getting their meals with blow dart and basically living in loincloths or wearing gourds over their genitals. That's all they wear.
Maybe they're spiritually more advanced, actually.
Well, I have a chapter in Modern Esoteric called Primitive Wisdom, and there's a lot to be said about living in that stage. But my example here is, look at the human race right now. We have people that live in the Stone Age, and then we have a breakaway civilization, people that live off planet even, and everyone in between, like you and me. So we're living in this incredible time of this human awakening. And that is why there is so much attention on the planet right now, especially what the humans are going to do. Because now we have these toys. We have these firecrackers that could blow our fingers off and kill everybody around us, or that could be used in a benevolent way to bring free energy to this planet. With free energy, then you could have desalinization plants. You can turn deserts into gardens again. And we could reverse the environmental degradation if we work together. But of course, we're very divided.
That's polarity, really, isn't it?
That is the polarity. Yep.
Mm-hmm. Some people and some researchers even suggest that the whole alien ET topic is in fact part of an elite power agenda, structure, plan, a new world order agenda in order to implement the fear or the fascination of this topic of there being aliens or extraterrestrial races working with the government or UFO crashes and all of that. But what are your thoughts on this topic?
Everything can be perverted. Just like the term Illuminati started out the seekers of light. That sounds like a promising role to be in, but then it got perverted and it got taken into using for forces of the dark side. Same thing goes with ETs. I think there's a lot of disinformation. There is a lot of perversion of truths regarding the whole ET phenomenon. Let's put it this way. Disinformation is usually 90% correct. It's just the red herring that's thrown in there to throw you off on what the people who are putting out this disinformation want you to think about something incorrectly. But they'll give you good information otherwise to gain your trust. That's why we're in such a predicament right now. That's why we can't seem to stop wars or stop the malnutrition and starvation on this planet. We can't bring ourselves up collectively because we're so divided still. We're still cut down by these forces that can manipulate us in such a way that we don't know up from down. We don't know right from wrong all the time. It's very difficult in this world of fake news and disinformation to really separate the wheat from the chaff, so to speak. And that's what we have to do.
So how do we know what the truth really is? Even in the UFO community and just say in the truth movement, there's a lot of internal fighting, a lot of people actually going against each other, battling, which is like incredible when you think of it, because most people want to work for, let's just say, greater awareness. But there's a lot of bickering and fighting amongst a lot of even the researchers, but also people who are becoming more aware. How do we distinguish what the truth is? Some researchers will say 200 alien races and these people are working with the government, or the New World Order is this and it's not that, or whatever. Where is the truth? Is the truth out there, and how do we find it?
It's a great question. And of course, the truth is out there. The truth will always be out there. The truth is like a pillar that will always stand tall. You can wrap it in a whole bunch of other ways with your disinformation or lies, but those things eventually drop off. And what still remains? The truth. It is a constant in the universe. So to answer your question, how do we as individuals seek that truth and know it's the truth? Well, then it all comes back to ourselves. It comes back to, do you really seek personal mastery? Do you want to be enlightened? Do you want to become the best human being you can? Do you want to have a very strong and healthy body, which does tie into the mind? We all all the systems work together. Body, mind, and spirit is all part of the whole. So really, it is enhancing these human systems within ourselves. And I believe that this will give us the ability to discern what is right, what is wrong. And that's why it's kind of like the magician's trick. Once you see how they pull the rabbit out of the sleeve, you can watch that act a million times and see them how they pull the rabbit out of the sleeve. But until you learn how these deception mechanisms are taking place, you're in the trap.
So when listening to different researchers and listening to their truth, we must expect that most researchers, even yourself and everybody else, is speaking their truth and being honest, mostly at least, about what they're presenting and what they are researching. So if they think or believe that they have the truth and others don't, some will even say that others do not have it because they have it. How do people who are searching for all this alternative information, how do they well, discern or even, you know, feel this is actually right? They have to feel it for themselves, or what?
Well, they do. Absolutely. But as far as who are you going to follow, whose books are you going to read, I think integrity is absolutely important. You have to be, especially for someone like me who writes books on these subjects, personal integrity has to be the number one thing. If I make a mistake, I have to admit I'm wrong, and I have to remedy that mistake, first and foremost.
And you're even the founder of your own publishing company, and you have several authors actually who are publishing their books through your company, right?
Correct. Leo Lyons-Zagami, Lon Milo Duquette, several others in this esoteric field, which is full of quacks too. But how do you know who is really truthful and honest? And I would say it's a matter of integrity.
So you're deciding who will be published through your company. Isn't that how?
That's correct. Yep.
And how do you feel this is the truth and this is what we would like to print and publish?
Well, first of all, in terms of publishing and what I'm looking for, first of all, they have to be articulate and a good writer. They have to be able to put it down in manuscript form, and I have to read it and feel that there's some kind of resonance with what I know, with what they're saying. And again, it comes down to integrity. Is this person just doing it to showboat and get on the stage, or is this person putting themselves at great risk? Like Leo Zagami's had many death threats and basically can't go back to Italy at this point. He's now here in the U.S. and we had a chance to do a talk during Contact in the Desert. He gave a wonderful presentation on the Invisible Masters. He did a whole book through CCC Publishing on this, and a 400-some page book just on these entities that have been working in this world. Now, Leo's books, his Confessions of an Illuminati series, which CCC Publishing publishes, they go pretty dark. What these Cabal, Illuminati, whatever you want to call them, have been doing all these centuries is very dark. And he comes out of these bloodline families. He knows these people. He's been to P2 meetings in Italy and the Vatican.
And I would also urge our viewers to see our Age of Truth TV interview with Leo Zagami in order to hear his fascinating and mind-blowing story. But he is actually being published through your company, and you've had this for many years. How many books have you written?
I've written 9 myself, and I've published several dozen altogether through CCC Publishing.
You have been traveling all over the world to many so-called faraway destinations. And during your travels and research, what would you consider to be your most eye-opening discoveries? Great
question. Well, I've climbed to the top of the Great Pyramid on a full moon in March 1993. That was pretty amazing.
But you're not allowed to do that, are you?
You're not allowed to do that. Let's call it youthful indiscretion, Lucas. I'm not encouraging people to do that. They might get in trouble.
So you were actually able to walk up there and go unnoticed?
The blocks on the Great Pyramid are about the size of a washing machine. So if you can jump up a 3-foot block.
Some are taller even.
It is a physical exertion. I was in my 20s when I did it, but that would be pretty close to the top of the list. Plus, I've just come back from Antarctica earlier this year. That was an incredibly eye-opening experience going down there. And then also the megalithic sites around Peru and Bolivia. The Sacred Valley of Peru is the highest concentration of megaliths in the world. And I was there with Brian Forrester and Nassim Harriman and a group of 150 delegates from the Resonance Academy, and I was one of the guest speakers. That was an incredible, eye-opening experience.
Did you make any finds or see things that were a bit unusual, or make any discoveries yourself during your travels around the world?
Absolutely. And this is why I started out as a travel writer. Most of my books are travel-minded, Sacred Places series, World Stompers. Extreme Adventures series. I mean, this is where how I got started in publishing and writing. But then seeing that there's a much bigger picture, and this is what really interests me, is to get into the esoteric subjects, and that's my current line of books. But to go up to some of these megaliths in Peru, which are 30 feet tall, weigh many tons in weight, and not seeing any chisel marks with these most unusual connection points, like dropping down to a V, perfect seams. You can't even put a credit card or a piece of paper in there, and these things are thousands of years old. To just rub your hand over that and to see them with your own eyes and see the patina that some of them have that look like there was a form of vitrification or softening of the stones and allowing them to harden. Everything is being re-examined right now. The view of history that we have, especially prehistory, there's so much more to it, and it's so much older than we've given it credit for. And it goes to these antediluvian civilizations. There are underwater ruins around the world. Now, how could that possibly be if we just came of age in Western civilization from Mesopotamia and Egypt? Well, the ocean level was the same back then. How could you have a place like Yonaguni off of Okinawa Islands in Japan and have this massive complex of carved stones?
Would that be part of Lemuria?
Yes, that would have been in that area for sure. And to have other places off the coast of Cuba that was just discovered in the last 20 years using side scanning sonar to find a complex city, including pyramids and plazas, which I have images of in my book, Modern Esoteric, about lost civilizations on this planet. They're all over the place.
So what do you think did happen to Lemuria and Atlantis?
When I was down in Antarctica, it was very clear that there were climatic changes, even physical changes such as pole shifts and the movement of continents. And it happens quite frequently, more than you would think on this planet, every 12, 15, 17,000 years. There's quite a bit of evidence, including what Jacques Cousteau discovered down in some underwater caves in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, where the stalactites were at an angle underwater. Okay, well, they can only be formed when it's straight up, straight down. But more importantly, they also discovered in magnetic, little magnetic pieces in lava flows that always point to the magnetic or south pole, the magnetic poles, right? Well, those change all the time. And sometimes they change by 45 degrees.
Natural changes, right?
Correct. So this is all what I'm leading up to, is that this planet goes through periodic pole shifts. And this is what has sunk the continent of Lemuria in the Pacific and the downfall of the Atlantis civilization before that. And we often think of one singular location for both of these antediluvian civilizations, where in fact that they were more of a global network, that they had colonies and other places in other parts of the world. Some of them sunken, some of them can still be found, and a legacy, such as the Osirian Empire in Egypt that started 12,000 years ago, right after the last major Earth changes. That is why we see some of the best preserved artifacts. Not only are they in Egypt, but the best pyramids are the oldest pyramids. I did a horse ride from Giza to Saqqara when I was in Egypt in '93. And there are pyramids that have just dissolved to rubble and sand. Yet you can see how perfect the Great Pyramids are far off in the distance. So how is it that a civilization was at its most refined state at its oldest state, and that it got worse in their building technique of pyramids over time? So many examples like that around the world. And that's why I also encourage people to travel, because it's such an eye-opening experience, and it will help you to grow individually as well.
Who built the pyramids?
Well, it was constructed during the age of Leo, and this is what Graham Hancock and Robert Schoch, John Anthony West, the alternative view of Egyptian history have shown that the Sphinx looks out directly at the age of Leo 12,500 years ago. It's called the Precession of the Equinox, and Graham Hancock, one of my colleagues, I've met him at a few of the conferences, great speaker, was just awarded the Lifetime Achievement Award at Contacting the Desert. He has shown how back then the Leo, the Sphinx, which may have not been a pharaoh head, but a lion head, looking directly out into the constellation of Leo, which was the one preceding the Pisces. After that, now we're entering the age of Aquarius. So if you look at it in these very long epochs of time, and how the Earth, through this 12,700 year cycle, slowly tilts back and forth and arrows out to different constellations during this time, this great big loop, that you can start to use that as a way to determine the age in which these were built. So to answer your question, this would have been the Osirian Empire immediately following the fall of Atlantis. The survivors went to Egypt with their technology, with their knowledge, constructed the pyramids. They were not pharaoh's tombs. They were more like initiation chambers.
And built many, many, many years before what we're told, right?
Correct. Thousands of years before. Everything is thousands of years earlier, including the megaliths in Peru.
So were they influenced or helped by, let's just say, alien races or extraterrestrials in Egypt?
Well, let's put it this way. They employed a certain technology to build the pyramids that is still unknown to us today. And we see this in Peru as well, that there are stones that appear to be shaped or formed like a trowel mark on them. And you see that in Egypt as well. So to move that amount of blocks in such a precise form with, of course, an outer layer on the Great Pyramids lost. On the second pyramid, you can still see it on the top. Or what has been uncovered below the sand, you can still see the original casing stones of the Great Pyramid. And that is quite remarkable how precise, again, those buildings were built. So, you know, the Japanese tried to reproduce a smaller scale Great Pyramid, and they failed. They couldn't do it. So again, we don't even have the technology to reproduce some of these buildings and structures of the past. And there are blocks in Baalbek, Lebanon, which even the most advanced cranes of this day can't even move. And they even have some of the blocks in the quarry, and then others are built into the base of the temple. It's quite befuddling.
So what kind of technology was used?
Well, one of my appearances on the show Ancient Aliens, I talked about auditive levitation, and that is matching the frequency of matter in such a way that you can manipulate it. And a good example is how an opera singer can shatter a wine glass with just their voice. It's just the sound frequency that does it. Nikola Tesla, one of the greatest geniuses in this modern age, said if you want to understand the universe, think of it in terms of energy, vibration, and frequency. And that's what it's all about. And these are as yet unknown technologies that were employed to build these megalithic sites, to move these massive blocks. And it could have just been as easy as matching the frequency and moving it over. No cranes, no pulleys, no rollers, no slaves, just some high technology that's able to do it. Now, what's interesting, and I profile this case in my book, Future Esoteric, there was this Swedish doctor named Dr. Jarl, who was invited to come out to the Tibetan monasteries in the 1930s. And he helped one of the high lamas get over an illness. Sometimes Western medicine can be beneficial. and they trusted him. So they said, well, now we're going to show you something. And they took him out to a meadow where all these monks had gathered in a horseshoe-like configuration. There were 3 rows of them, and I have illustrations from Dr. Jarl in my book, Future Esoteric. And they were basically levitating stones using sound. Well, here's what I found out fairly recently that's so interesting about it. There was a row of drummers, there was a row of trumpeters, and then there was a row of monks who were oming and chanting. And it was at the moment that they all looked up and the cacophony of sound, did the boulder start to shake and then move, and then it transferred over to a giant cliff nearby where it was placed.
By the power of their minds?
There is consciousness involved in the auditive levitation process, at least what was demonstrated to Dr. Jarl in Tibet.
So this is actually a human ability, not alien technology.
Well, that's correct. Let's always assume that humans can do it first, but there are secrets or technology that have been lost. But I would say ETs would know how to do this themselves. And who knows, maybe they telepathically communicated to someone how to do it.
Well, if they are here, why shouldn't they interfere in this way if they are working with factions of our governments or people who can channel these ETs, also the so-called good ones?
Well, again, I think it's a matter of this prime directive that they can't do it on a grand scale, nor do they want to, because they don't want to end up being our babysitters if we all say, oh, the aliens are here to save us. They don't want to do that. They would rather work through individuals and let those individuals be the spokespersons for what they were told or learned.
So what about the Temple of Karnak in Luxor? Was that actually built also with this hall of pillars? Was that built during the time of Ramses II?
Well, that very well could have been, or added on to. What I found most interesting in Luxor and Karnak are the obelisks. And what are those obelisks for? They're very unusual structures. My good friend David Hatcher Childress just came out with the whole book on the obelisks, including obelisks on Mars and the Moon, which he has in his book. Yeah, and there is one up on...
Has he seen those?
He has not seen those personally, but there are photos, including one on the moon of Mars called Phobos. And Buzz Aldrin even said, we should go out to Mars. We should go see what that obelisk is on the moon of Mars. And I have photos of it in Future Esoteric. So there are obelisks on other planets.
And can we confirm that those photos are real, or have they been tampered with?
No, they are real. They come out of different space agencies, including the European Space Agency is photographing it. We know about it. It's been known for decades.
And can we trust the validity of those pictures coming from those official places?
Good question. I'd say generally yes, when you have multiple data points that would show them, and different agencies that have taken them. I mean, astronomy, just personal astronomy is getting to the point where we can start looking at the moon very closely with some of our telescopes. Did you know that if you wanted to go to one of the high-powered observatories, you cannot focus on the moon? You can look anywhere else in the universe you want to go, but you can't use those telescopes to focus in on the details of the moon. And the reason is because what you'll see is that there is an extraterrestrial presence. There are artifacts all over the moon.
Even on the light side of the moon, not just on the dark side that we never see.
Yep. And there are so many phenomenons that occur that can be observed even by amateur astronomers using the most high-powered telescopes they can. Lights in different craters that shouldn't be there.
So what about the legendary conspiracy theory, or fact or not, who knows? Let's hear your take on it. The moon landings in 1969. The moon landing, was it real? Was it faked? Was it staged? Was it filmed by Stanley Kubrick? What was the real deal, in your opinion?
Well, I think both. Yeah, there were some photos that were created by Kubrick and perhaps others as a hedge in case the mission failed. There was a lot of political clout going into that mission, which, by the way, we're coming up on the 50-year anniversary. I did think they landed there. I do.
At that time though.
Yes, I had the opportunity to meet Buzz Aldrin once at a travel conference, and I was kind of shadowing him for a while, and then finally he left his booth and we started walking down the aisle, and he looks up, "Who's this tall guy following me?" And I said, "Hey, Buzz, really honored to meet you." Just very nice to him. He kind of warmed up to me, and finally he stopped for a minute. We got a chance to talk, and I asked him about the orbs entering the capsule on the way back. And he looked at me with those steely blue eyes. And my perception at the time was he knew what I was talking about, but he didn't give me an answer either way. But the way he looked at me was confirming what I was asking, and that they had encountered ETs on the journey, both on the moon and coming back, that there were these orbs that were following them that actually made it into the capsule. How, I don't know. And there are a lot of mysteries regarding the Apollo missions, including the very real possibility that the Apollo missions continued on all the way up to Apollo 20, which were then going to investigate some of these ET bases in ruins. And there is some footage of even human-like entities with these things on their eyes. You may have seen it. And Linda Moulton Howe, a colleague of mine, has interviewed one of the Apollo 20 astronauts who said, "Yeah, I was the guy who filmed that. We went into an ancient craft and discovered all this stuff. And of course, it had to be kept secret, because think about if you were the president, and this is called the John Lear test. He's the grandson of Lear Jet. Okay, he's still alive in outside of Las Vegas. I just heard him talk in Laughlin a couple months ago with Carrie Cassidy. But the John Lear test is, let's say you, Lucas, are the president of the United States, and you are given the opportunity to make this disclosure to the world, or at least to your fellow country citizens. Would you do it? Because you have to think of the ramifications. If you do it, first of all, they're going to say, your citizens, why didn't you tell us this years ago? Well, hey, I'm just the first president to do it. Okay. Well, then after the whole big hubbub about, okay, we've been visited, the next question is, how did they get here? And they didn't get here with Apollo-like rockets, which are like Roman candles, propulsion devices that need solid fuel boosters to get there. No, we're talking about exotic technology, anti-gravity technology, and these craft that can somehow span the universe in someone's lifetime. Now, we all know that the speed of light is so fast that even if you were to travel at that speed, it would still take you decades and centuries to go from place to place.
So why do you think they are covering it up? Why do you think it is shrouded in so much mystery?
This is the John Lear test. And then...
What is the John Lear test, though?
Well, that is you as the president, Lucas. Would you want to belabor your whole administration with questions about why was this all covered up? What is all this technology? Then you'll be in the position where you have to explain this to your citizens.
Well, the real question would be, was there ever a president elected by the people? Was there a president here that came into office in a real way and not just orchestrated from within? A president that is not part of a New World Order plan?
Well, John F. Kennedy was prepared to make this announcement and Some say this is part of the reason why he was killed by the cabal. Jimmy Carter saw a UFO when he was governor of Georgia and said he wanted to get to the bottom of it. Bill Clinton said he would like to get to the bottom of it.
But all of those presidents were orchestrated by a New World Order agenda plan, weren't they?
Or were thwarted by it. Let me read you a quote from John F. Kennedy in 1963. Kennedy warned the public of the dangers of secrecy and secret societies and of a monolithic and ruthless conspiracy that relies upon infiltration. JFK sent a top secret memo to the CIA requesting the release of UFO information. 10 days later, he's assassinated. That was the MJ-12 assassination directive, discovered, written by MJ1 Allen Dulles. I mentioned Jimmy Carter saw the UFO. President Bill Clinton in 1993, White House correspondent Sarah McLennan quoted Clinton in a response to UFO disclosure, quote, "Sarah, there's a secret government inside the government, and I don't control it," end quote. CIA Director James Woolsey, in a 3-hour private meeting with Dr. Stephen Greer, the CIA director, stated, quote, "I know this subject is real. I want to know why the hell I can't gain access to it. And how do we disclose? What do we not have access to?" End quote. See, this is the John Lear test, Lucas. There are so many layers to this that if you were to make this disclosure as president, it could belager you the whole time. All the things that you wanted to get done for the country may not get done. So when John Lear proposed this to Art Bell on Coast to Coast years ago, both him and Art Bell said, we wouldn't disclose if we were the president. It's just such a can of worms that if you open it up, Pandora's box, you can't close it again.
But would they be allowed to disclose it? Isn't that the real question? Would you even have the opportunity to do it?
There is that too, that there would be a lot of forces telling you can't.
Would you even get to that point, becoming president and being able to talk freely about things like that? That would be the big question, I would assume.
Exactly. And the list goes on about how there is a secret government in this country and presumably in all Western countries and around the world that are the real control groups. And to get through them, to get by them, is a monumental task. That's why it hasn't been done. And that's why Kennedy was assassinated inside a coup d'etat.
And that was when they invented or presented the, let's just say, the term conspiracy theory.
The CIA came up with that, yeah, to deflect criticism of the Warren report on the Kennedy assassination, which is just so full of holes and so easily seen to be a fraud, including the people like the Dulles brothers, Allen Dulles being one of the first CIA director that got fired by Kennedy, and he's on the Warren Commission. Come on, talk about a conflict of interest. So this is what will happen, and presidents know this, that there is this dangerous cabal that wants to run things their way. There is a secret government in this country, including in Europe, through NATO, is one of their enforcement arms, and now the EU. So they're working together.
Do you think that the presidents are on a need-to-know level?
Yes.
Or do they actually know a lot more than they're telling?
They are. For example, Jimmy Carter, as I mentioned, wanted to get to the bottom of it. In 1977, Carter officially reported a UFO and made a campaign promise to tell the American public the full truth on the UFO matter if elected. He was elected. Attorney Daniel Sheehan testified at a 2001 National Press Club that President Carter demanded the release of the UFO classified files and was denied access by CIA Director George Herbert Walker Bush. And we know he has ties through his father, Prescott Bush, to Nazi Germany, who is giving funding through Union Bank to the Nazis in World War II.
Well, according to basically most researchers, he has ties to practically everything.
Yeah. Let's say his priority was with Nazi Germany. And they were the very first New World Order. They were the very first ones to propose a world government. Had they won and somehow beaten the U.S., they would have installed this one world government.
But didn't they? Didn't they secretly, as some people suggest?
See, that's very interesting, because this is a line of my research on my next book, is going into this whole concept of a Fourth Reich.
Or infiltration.
Yep. Infiltration, using intelligence rather than standing armies, using finance to buy and control corporations. So it's a new kind of fascism, Lucas, that we're dealing with. It's not the Mussolini or Hitler fascism where a government controls corporations. It's the other way around now. It's corporate heads who meet behind closed doors to make decisions now control the people in government. And this is what we're dealing with on this planet. And what we have to realize is that there are these forces out there that control all the information that we really want to get our hands on and understand and know. But we can't, because it's bottled up into this need to know. As you said, even the president can't even get into, in their own words, like Carter being denied by the CIA director. How is a CIA director above the president? And then he that himself becomes a president.
Project Paperclip was obviously a reference there to Nazi scientists being brought over by the CIA, right, in the 40s. Absolutely,
and this is established fact. And you have people like General Reinhard Gehlen, who should have been in the Nuremberg trials for war crimes leading up the new CIA. You have people like Werner von Braun and Hermann Oberth coming over and starting NASA. And you have the MK Ultra psychiatrists who came here to do the MK Ultra. You know why it's spelled MK? It's mind control, but the Germans spell it control with a K. That's what that was all about. And that is mind controlling on a mass scale. And this happened in San Francisco, and I know some researchers who were involved in what happened. And I did a video called The Underground Presidio on my YouTube channel called Esoteric Series, if you want to check it out, where I went around and found all the above ground evidence I could for the underground network that goes down 3 levels, where much of this MK Ultra experiments happened in the 1950s and 60s.
Joseph Mengele was also brought over, right? According to a lot of people.
Correct. Yep.
Also, former trauma-based mind control victims have spoken about him.
That's correct. And one of my goals when I was in South America for 4 months was to look into some of these locations. Went to San Carlos de Bariloche, where Hitler supposedly escaped and lived for a while there. Also the Eden Hotel in La Falda. Went to all these places. And when I was giving my talk at Ions a month and a half ago, Stephen Bassett did the intro, and we did a little Q&A afterwards. And he told me there's this new series called Hunting Hitler. And I've watched these series, and it was all these places I went to and more. Very compelling argument that Hitler did escape, that the Fourth Reich was put in place, or this third power, as author Henry Stevens describes it, as this player that was pitting us against each other, fomenting the Cold War and playing us off on both sides. The Cold War didn't really need to happen. We were allies with the Soviets in World War II. How did we become their enemies in such a short amount of time?
Problem, reaction, solution.
There you go.
But were you able to visit those places in South America and actually do some discoveries on your own?
I did, for sure.
What did you find?
Well, for example, I took the tour of the Eden Hotel. It's now not a hotel anymore. It's just a tourist destination. And in the setup before the tour, we watched a video. They showed how the icons were very very close with the Third Reich and Hitler himself. There were FBI documents that came out in 2016. The whole Hunting Hitler episodes are based on these documents that give place names and personal names. And so I did the tour, and then the guide could speak English pretty well. I asked him towards the end, I go, and we're in the suite where supposedly Hitler stayed. It's like, what do you think? Do you really think Hitler survived the war? And he's like, absolutely. There are people right here in town that worked here in the Eden Hotel. Now they're elderly, but they're teenage chambermaids. I saw him, Eva Braun, Martin Bormann.
So when did he supposedly die, if not in the bunker in 1945 in Berlin?
Sometime in the early 1960s, and he's probably buried in Paraguay, as I understand it. Yeah.
So please talk about these mind control MK Ultra techniques. How does it actually work today? The US government stated publicly in the early 1970s that they actually closed down the MK Ultra project and that they no longer use these mind control techniques. But I guess most people know otherwise. But please talk about how mind control works today. How highly advanced are those is that mind control technology?
Well, it goes all the way up to what the 5G rollout is all about too. It goes into technology that is downright scary. But as far as what we know from the Church Commission, who investigated this in the 1970s, and yeah, then they were forced to say, well, we shut those programs down. Well, they may have shut down those programs, but they started new ones. This is not ended. But in San Francisco, where I lived for 14 years, talking to a few people that knew about the MK Ultra experiments there, they had a flop house, like a two-way mirror, and they would employ prostitutes to bring in people off the streets, and they would say, hey, I got some LSD, or you want to try some ketamine, or whatever this. They were testing every one of the recreational drugs to see what would make the subjects the most susceptible to suggestion. This is what it was all about, at least in these experiments in San Francisco.
And this was before the youth movement, the youth revolution in the 60s, right?
Well, it was before it, and it was during it too. And a lot of this goes into Laurel Canyon down in LA. A lot of the musicians. Jim Morrison's dad was Admiral Morrison, who was there during the Gulf of Tonkin incident, which started the Vietnam War. So there's all these people. David Crosby comes from a military family. Many of the rockers of the 60s may have gotten their in or support to become a rock star in this same way, because they knew that music is a way to also influence people, both subliminally and basically what a rock star might say on the stage. And they were very interested in this. This was also part of mind control. But then with the war movement starting up, they decided, this can't happen. We don't want these people protesting. Let's divide them. And that's why LSD was legal until 1967. Hey, just get nuked out on drugs and go dance and forget about this anti-war movement stuff. That played right into the hands of the MK Ultra mass medication of people. But then they realized that LSD, not so suggestive when you're on it, and that's why it became illegal in '67, because it didn't work on the level that they wanted it to. It's not like people were taking it and saying, oh, I'm going to go join the military and go to Vietnam now. It's quite the opposite. They're saying, tune in, tune out, drop out kind of thing, and not playing into that. And the 60s was actually a very revolutionary period for human consciousness, because many new ideas started to come out. The Judeo-Christian formula was starting to break down, and people were starting to think for themselves. Eastern philosophies and mysticism started coming to this country. It's really interesting period.
But can you actually open a portal into another realm, another way of accessing spirituality through these drugs, such as like mushrooms and LSD and all of these things? is that actually a right way to access this information, or should it be done probably through meditation and in other ways?
Well, I'll tell you something that was just told to me a few days ago when I did this energy healing work, and that is, if you do psychedelic drugs or any other kind of recreational drugs, you will allow these entities to come in. And so unless you're some kind of shaman from South America with ayahuasca, you got to tread lightly with this stuff. You got to be very careful.
So ayahuasca is good?
Well, I think you have to be in the right setting with the right people to try it. But there is the potential of, coming back to the Archons, for giving them a way in. See, when you open some of these psychic doorways, you're allowing other entities to come in. You're seeing in a different way, but you're also making yourself vulnerable. So I don't think I can advocate doing it unless someone is very solid frame of mind and knows the ramifications of what they might be getting into.
When asking you about mind control, you mentioned 5G as a means of mind control today. We are now in July 2019. And in regards to the current 5G debate all over the world, what is the most important thing to discuss when talking about 5G and debating this topic and the whole rollout of 5G and rigging up 5G masts all over the world?
Well, first of all, the 5G frequency is much like a microwave oven. It's these shorter curling waves. And that in and of itself should be very frightening, that we might all start getting cooked like you're in a microwave oven if you get too close to these things. There's already studies showing birds near 5G towers just dropping dead, just being cooked alive by them. But what also could be employed is this voice to skull technology, where they can start putting voices in people's heads. This has been tested in different ways, and not just 5G, but there are other crowd control techniques using frequency and vibration. You see, Lucas, everything has a duality. You can use this stuff for good and you can use this stuff for bad. And unfortunately, I think the 5G rollout is going to be used for bad. Look, we don't need faster internet. We don't need to download our movies in a split second. I don't mind waiting a little bit on 4G or even 3G. It's okay. So this is the benefit that we're being told why we all need 5G everywhere, so we can just watch our movies on an instant. Look, we can do it just fine the way we are. But there are other ulterior motives to all this. And it could be part of the eugenics programs that we've seen from Nazi Germany, even further back, but are still alive today. And this is one thing. You can even read it on the Georgia Guidestones, where it says to keep our human population at 500 million. Well, we're at 7+ billion right now. What happens to the 90% of us that are the useless eaters, as Kissinger described all these extra people? So there is a slow kill agenda at work. I discuss this in my esoteric books. And people have to be made aware of this. And it will help them mitigate the effects of what is happening to us if they understand that it is happening to us. But if you don't, and you're oblivious, well, you will reap the consequences, unfortunately.
Many mainstream scientists, the ones that are allowed to speak through the mainstream media and the ones that the politicians are getting their information from, they're saying that the 5G frequencies are okay and do not damage the human beings. It's not of risk to the health of human beings or anything like that. What are your thoughts on that? Why don't the politicians say no to have this rollout?
Well, in the 1950s, they said that cigarette smoking wasn't harmful to your health either. Why did they do it? Well, there's too many of us in their eyes. There's too many useless eaters. There's too many humans consuming resources, killing off the planet. Their approach to some of these problems that we were talking about is just reduce the population. I say we're fine with our population. In fact, maybe if we were to come into the reality of ET contact civilizations, perhaps people would voluntarily go to live on other planets. There are parts of America you can drive hundreds of miles and barely any people live out there. There is a lot of room on this planet.
So it's a depopulation plan, you think?
Yes. These are the soft kill agendas, the different ways that we're being poisoned and dumbed down and working till about 55 in our useful years and then just dropping dead. That's fine with the establishment to do that. So we're not taking Social Security and taxing the system. It's much better if people work really hard and thinking that's the way to get ahead in life and that's what you're supposed to do to raise your family, and then just drop dead. But look, our water is fluoridated in America. We have GMO foods. We have chemtrails that is dumping who knows what on us on a daily basis here. There's weather-controlled geoengineering in effect. And now you got the 5G on top of it. So many examples of how these slow kill operations are affecting us.
What are your thoughts on the possible physical or even psychological health risks and dangers of having this 5G implementation all over the world? What do you think we will see in the coming years?
People dying prematurely, people suffering from damages from these microwave towers. I'll give you a little secret. If you want to avoid the effect of 5Gs, go live in the woods. Trees absorb the 5G frequencies. And the best place you can be is in the woods with an Ethernet connection to get online, not Wi-Fi.
But not everybody can do that, just move into the woods.
No, not everybody can. But if you want to do something to get out of the 5G zones, that is a solution. What do you do elsewise? Hey, the city of Mill Valley in Marin County just boycotted 5Gs. There are citizen groups that can work on a local level to say, hey, let's just put a pause on this. Let's study it before we just roll it out and just see what happens.
They did that as well in the former EU capital, Brussels, in Belgium, interestingly enough.
Well, because this controlling elite knows they don't want to get zapped themselves.
Mm-hmm. So, briefly, what are your thoughts on another current big global issue, climate change and man-made climate change?
Well, definitely the cycles of this planet are changing. That's why land glaciers are melting worldwide. Glacier National Park here in Montana is going to have to change its name in a few decades. Been there a couple times, and you see the pictures from the 1920s or 30s, only 100 years ago, and the glacier was 80% bigger than it is. Even in Antarctica, one of the most interesting things I found, Lucas, was incredible melting, changing of animal habitats. There are certain warmer weather penguins which are opportunistic and moving into the formerly colder areas and are doing quite well. The Gentoo and the chinstrap penguins are growing in numbers.
But do you think it's man-made, as they said, this CO2 scare?
Well, that's a big question. I would say that humans are polluting this planet at a scale that's never before been seen. That's going to have consequences. But there are also cycles that the planet goes through. There are warming phases and there are cooling phases.
So could this not be part of a mind control, so-called collective mind control plan, a New World Order agenda, which they in fact talked about in the manifesto of the Club of Rome in 1968 when that was formed?
Absolutely. And I can give you some quotes. It's funny you say that because I am working on my new book called Beyond Esoteric, which will be out next year. And I was just doing the Club of Rome. In 1972, they came out with a report called The Limits to Growth, which stated if the present growth trends in world population, industrialization, pollution, and resource depletion continue unchanged, the limits to growth on the planet will be reached sometime within the next 100 years. The report went on to predict, quote, the human ecological footprint cannot continue to grow. And that's in 1972. Okay, well, we have continued to grow quite a bit.
And they talked about the implementation of a threat of climate change.
That's correct. And it's interesting that they have changed their perspective. Now it's all about climate change. And if you go to the Wikipedia page on the Club of Rome or their website, yeah, it's all about that. We have to mitigate the change. But look, I liked Al Gore in the time, but he is a prominent member of the Club of Rome, including Maurice Strong, both of whom are intimately involved with privately owned carbon trading groups like the Chicago Climate Exchange. So there's money to be made off this, Lucas, and that is one way to really see what a motive is. Follow the money. It's the old journalistic saying, if you can't make sense of a story, follow the money. And when there's big money involved, you can bet there's some kind of scam or someone's gaming the system.
That statement certainly speaks for itself, doesn't it?
That's right. This is one of my big takeaways from Antarctica, which I do in my presentation I'm giving across different conferences now. There is massive melting in certain areas. Okay, now if Antarctica was to go and the cap were to melt and drop off into the ocean, it would be like a glass of ice in a glass. When you have the ice in the glass, it doesn't overflow. But when you put ice into the glass, it overflows. And that's what Al Gore was saying would happen. But here's what's so very interesting. I'm right out here on the coast. I was in Capitola last night, right at sea level. No sea level rise. I was in Miami Beach right after I came back from this trip. No sea level rise. What is happening? And NASA even came out with this incredible map of Antarctica showing regions of extreme melting, but regions where the ice is growing. So somehow Mother Nature is balancing it out, and the sea levels have not risen, but something is changing in the world that we can see through the different penguin species, from people who have been going to Antarctica for 20 years and say that just the level of the ice around the Palmer Station has dropped so you can see the mountains. So a living memory of this happening. And if you can remember it from 20 years ago, you know that this is an accelerated rate. So something is happening in the globe, but there are also indications that other planets in our solar system are also heating up. So maybe it's something to do with the sun, or the galactic center is...
Or maybe HARP.
Or maybe HARP. And then that's another big question about geoengineering and what's going on with the steering weather. Did you see just the other day that in Guadalajara, Mexico, there was a hailstorm of several feet of hail in Mexico in summer? I mean, the systems of this planet, the weather systems, are just going haywire because humans are playing God. And the Air Force has a very famous report that says, we will control the weather of this planet by 2025. That's only 5.5 years away.
And if they can control the weather for good, they can control the weather for bad, right?
Absolutely. You want to make a place like Iran go through the mother of all droughts? You can do that with weather control. You want to bring rain to Saudi Arabia where it hasn't rained and torrentially for many years? You can do that. And we're seeing examples of both. You can use weather control against your enemies.
And it's certainly a political agenda at the moment, as we see. And people are afraid of for the planet. People fear that the planet will go under these days, it seems.
Look, this planet is a garden planet. It's a gem. It is so full of life. Corey Good, a person I've spoken with, was interviewed by Linda Moulton Howe once. I was sitting in on a private interview, no cameras, no recording, no taking notes. He was saying that there are ET species that just come to Earth only to get like a cockroach that lives in the Amazon. They don't even care what's going on with the human race. They're just here to mine this place for the genetic storehouse that it is. And it is. And we have to understand that, and we have to preserve it. And that's why with species going extinct at such a high rate right now, this is the human karma, what we are doing collectively to this planet. We are the stewards. We're the ones who are supposed to be saving it and preserving it and protecting the animals and all the nature, but we're not. We're exploiting it to such a degree that we're in the middle of the biggest species extinction since the dinosaurs died off. And this is completely at the hands of human activity, unfortunately saying so. Overhunting, collecting stupid things like rhino horns to send to China for an aphrodisiac that absolutely don't work. But we're a very superstitious race of people still. We're very easily manipulated, and the power that be know that. And it's all about money, really. It's all about exploiting resources. And this is the human dilemma. This is what we have to understand to be able to defeat this problem.
So what is your most important message for the world, or at least the viewers or people watching this program, or also in years ahead, hopefully? What would you say is the most important thing to say right now to people here on the 4th of July, Independence Day 2019?
2 words, and they're the 2 words that were written on the Temple of Apollo at Delphi. Know thyself. It all starts within, Lucas. It all starts with you becoming a master of yourself, of your environment, being a good person to everyone around you, and let that radiate. If we all start going on this personal journey to be the very best person we can be in our life, and to really know thyself for who we are, and that is body, mind, and spirit, that we can be the change we want to see in the world. And that's my advice, and it's the same advice that Alexander the Great and many of the Greeks of the classical age went to Delphi to discover. Know thyself.
If people want to read some of your books, and you've written 9, and they want to know more about you or have you there for a lecture, how can they find you?
Well, if you want to know more about what I do, and I also produce a very large street fair event in San Francisco called the How Weird Street Fair. I happen to wear one of these shirts from this year. There you go. You can see it.
Oh, wow.
You can find me at bradolsen.com. If you want to learn more about my books and the other authors I publish, go to cccpublishing.com. And if you buy one of my books off of that website, they go through my office and I'm able to send out a signed copy. If you want to see some of my videos, including audiobooks that I've done for modern esoteric and future esoteric, I have those for free on my YouTube page called Esoteric Book Series. And then you can find me in various places on Facebook, including Brad Olsen, Esoteric Series, CCC Publishing, and Sacred Places 108 Destination Books.
Brad Olsen, it's been absolutely amazing and fascinating, and I'm sure mind-blowing to a lot of people hearing your amazing thoughts on the world and the beyond. And I want to thank you very much for doing this interview with Age of Truth TV. We appreciate that very much.
Well, thank you very much, Lucas. You asked some really wonderful questions. It was great to connect with you and have the opportunity to speak in this age of truth. It was my pleasure.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Great to see you, Brad, and good luck to you, and have a wonderful day, Independence Day.
Yes, being very independent in thought and action.
You are indeed.
Thank you.
Thank you very much to Brad Olsen, and thanks to all of you for watching Age of Truth TV. You can support us by clicking onto our website, ageoftruth.tv. And please subscribe to our channel, like our videos, and hit the bell for notifications. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you again soon.